Hello and welcome to Talking Reds. It's the 1st of July, which means that the first milestone in the transfer window has now been reached in the guise of the PSR deadline. We'll discuss that and more today as we bring you our Forest Roundup. Okay, so Lyon swooped to the rescue to help Forest meet their PSR obligations with the signing of Moussa Niakhate. Forest joined the I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine club with the £35 million signing of academy product Elliot Anderson. Going the other way, Greek goalkeeper Odysseus Vlachodimos leaves Forest on a permanent deal. Joining me as ever is my co-host, live from Oklahoma, USA. It's Richard Spray. How you doing, mate?
No, I'm doing good. Thank you.
Excellent.
That just woke me up. Thanks.
Oklahoma. And today we are delighted to welcome to Talking Reds a Forest fan, an occasional podcast contributor. It's Danscape. How you doing,
Hello.
mate?
Hello, yeah. Delighted to be here. Not sure I live up to that music, but I'll try.
I've got no, we're really happy to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure this will be
the calculator ready as well.
Oh boy, here we go.
Chat. Yeah.
The first appearance we're sure of many to come in the future. Okay, let's just jump straight into it. The Forest news. Let's start a few days back with the news that Moussa Niakhate was suddenly going to Lyon for quite a large fee that perhaps none of us saw coming. Reported could be 20 million, even at one point, maybe 26 million euros. And effectively, with the Mangala deal done as well, that's our PSR headache solved. What did you make of all that, Dan, when the news broke that Lyon was swooping in for Niakhate?
Yeah, I think there was sort of rumours early on that it was going to happen. I guess the assumption was that we'd maybe make a small profit on him, 5 million, something like that. As soon as the rumours were 20 million plus, then it seemed like an absolute no-brainer. He's a defender that, for me, hasn't quite lived up to the hype that he came in with. Always sort of given the moniker of being the Rolls-Royce defender and things like that. But I think he suited us against certain teams and then struggled against others. So, had good games against the likes of Villa and Man United, Newcastle, but struggled against some of the more direct teams like Brentford and Bournemouth, things like that. So, as soon as you see a £20 million offer on the table, although I would have kept him in the squad for the coming season, I think obviously it's a bit of a no-brainer to accept that. And if we've done that specifically around the numbers involved with PSR, then we all love PSR all of a sudden to find a way around it.
Yeah, I think as PSR goes on, a lot more of us are trying to get to grips with the ins and outs of deadlines and what you can count here and what amortization means there. Richard, what did you make of Niakhate Mangala going to Lyon to help us out of the hole?
Yeah, it was an unexpected lifeline, right? I mean, it sets the stage for us to potentially keep Murillo around and hold out for a better price point for him that we find more favorable. Clearly, if he stays, that's great too, because he'll only be better next season. But at the same time, like what Dan's saying, it's kind of remarkable just the way things have evolved with Niakhate, because that first season when he was out and injured, it felt like that was a huge problem for us in the defensive back line. Like we lost something that was potentially very, very valuable and very favorable to help us win matches. But it sort of drifted into more of a backup role and sort of a secondary piece. So definitely appreciate the time he's been here and appreciate the fact that he's now helped us kind of find our way through this PSR nightmare that we were all a little bit, fatigued by and worried about leading up to that June 30th deadline.
Yeah, I think in effect, we're looking at about 50 million pounds or euros for Mangala and for Niakhate. So, that is snatch your hand off money for players that we bought in, have managed to turn around and sell on for profit very, very quickly. It feels like Forest are finding their feet on that side of the equation. Saturday morning, all of a sudden, the rumour was out that a swap deal involving Anthony Elanga going to Newcastle for Elliot Anderson, that rumour was doing the rounds. Now, as we know now, Newcastle were potentially chancing their arm a bit when it comes to them trying to get Elanga. And I know that it caused quite a fuss on social media. And I was thinking, well, look, if they're coming for Elanga, it sounds like they're offering Anderson, and they must surely be offering money on top. But then it really kind of came to light that it was Newcastle that needed Anderson going out the door for significant money, because their own PSR problem was quite significant. And it's been reported today that they were very much concerned that they were looking at a double-digit penalty in terms of points if they weren't able to get themselves some money coming in for some of their players. And even the likes of Kieran Trippier was being touted and muted as leaving the club just a few hours before the England game. So it's clear that we were going in to help Newcastle with buying a player, as we've seen happening in the last 10 days or so, clubs buying academy products off each other in the I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine fashion, which I've got to be completely honest with you, I have no problem with whatsoever. I'm going to say it. I just don't, it's within the rules. No one's done anything wrong. You know, at the end of the day, the PSR rules are very broken, and the clubs are now trying to do what they can to work within the rules and comply. And that's all they're doing, complying. So we see Anderson coming to Forest for 35 million, who has helped out Newcastle United. They've got rid of Minter to Brighton for a similar fee. I mean, why do you think, Richard, that Forest have gone in for a deal like this with Anderson? I mean, it can't just purely be to help another club out. Is this a good move for the player, Rich? Is this a good move for the club? What do you think?
Yeah, based off of the depth chart that he was looking at Newcastle, he really wasn't going to have an opportunity to break through, even though last season I think the anticipation was he would. But then as he got injured, he kind of slipped down the pecking order. And so I think with our club, he serves an immensely important purpose, which is to find a backup for two positions. I mean, I know we've talked about this offline, you and Dan and I mean, I could conceivably see him as a potential piece that backs up, or as a contingency or a future state plan behind Morgan, just because we don't have any clue what's going to happen with him in the next year. If we get a crazy number coming at us for him, he could be a January or end of season outgoing player. So based off the creativity he has with the ball, based off he's got decent passing, he's got some decent physicality to him. He seems to have good balance. You watch the highlights, he scores goals. But he can also play the left wing as well, or potentially right wing, or even left back. I think WT Analysis said he'll sometimes in a pinch be able to play a left back. So that positional versatility, I just think it gives him much more opportunity to get on the pitch with us than it did previously. And I think, Dan, you probably will touch on this too. We might even see him get some spot starts this year, which I don't think he would have gotten with Newcastle. So it's a high number, and we'll see how the numbers shake out. I think they reported 45,000 a week. Something like that would be his salary. So definitely talented, definitely got, I mean, I think someone's saying that he's the Newcastle version of Maradona, which is pretty extreme, I think, from a comparison standpoint, but we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I think he's definitely got a place with this team, and he'll log more times. I think he'll get on the pitch more than Reina did. Let's put it that way.
Anderson joined Newcastle at the age of 8 and broke into the first team in 2021, going on to make 55 appearances. He impressed on loan at Bristol Rovers in League Two during the second half of the 2021-22 season before returning to Newcastle that summer. And during the 23-24 campaign, Anderson played 26 times for Newcastle, with 10 of those starting. The season was disrupted by a back injury, and that ruled him out from October until March. But he is very highly thought of, Dan. And it seems that Eddie Howe and the club really didn't want to let him go. Clearly, they had to comply with PSR, and this just highlights again how, you know, you've got a gem in your ranks, and rather than keep him, you've got to sell him. What's your thoughts on all of that, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in terms of when you talked about the PSR sort of workaround of some of these possibly over the top transfer fees. I think the unintended consequence that people perhaps don't like about it is that the academy players become the sort of pawns in the game, because of the pure profit side of their transfers. So, you know, you're never going to see players like Anderson play for their boyhood club throughout anymore, because at some point there'll always be a benefit to selling them. In terms of, you know, him as a player, Maradona comparison, someone said Gascoigne, I think, as well. The trouble is, I think Eddie Howe sang the praises of John Joe Shelby as well when we signed him, and the Newcastle fans were sort of singing his praises. So I have to take some of that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, or a little bit of rose-tinted view on him.
I think we all knew more about John Joe Shelby, and that we perhaps thought, yeah, Shelby's a decent player. He's had a decent career. So when he was coming, I think there weren't many people that were like thinking, what is Eddie Howe on about? But with Anderson, I think, Dan, the question is, how much did we really know about him? So we're going off really what they're saying more than we can anything else, because we haven't seen a lot of him.
I think like my memory of him when he came on against us at the City Ground in the first Premier League season was that he changed the game. He made a big impact, and as soon as I heard the rumor, I remember during that game thinking, I wish that's the kind of player we could sign, because he's he's young, British player, and so on. And so when I heard the rumor, I was very excited by it. He ticks a lot of boxes for us with the Premier League experience. He's been in a Premier League club for most of his career, so he knows, in terms of just training every day with all those players and things, that's got to be a benefit. Obviously, I'm assuming he ticks sort of homegrown player squad ratio things as well, and the versatility is good across all the front line and possibly deeper, back into the midfield. So there's a lot of things, a lot of reasons why I can imagine we were interested in him anyway. I think the transfer fee is sort of almost irrelevant in this particular transaction. I think you've got to just treat it as if it was undisclosed, and also consider that the Vlachodimos signing is probably to offset some of what we've obviously paid for him at 35 million. I think my only concern with the signing is that he's only made those, or perhaps not my concern, but I can see why on the social media side of it, people aren't jumping for joy as they were when we signed, say, Sangare for similar money. Is that he's never had a season like Morgan Gibbs-White had in the Championship, where you could really see what he could do for a whole season, playing regularly, kind of tearing it up. Because he's had those stop-start times at Newcastle, I think there's just that question mark where, people aren't as excited because they've not really seen what he's done. His stats aren't brilliant in terms of sort of contributing towards goal contributions and things like that. And he's got, 13 starts in the Premier League. So there's a bit to go. There's a little bit of unknown, but I can definitely see why we were interested in him. Personally, definitely the kind of player I'd be looking for us to sign.
Yeah, I think very much full of potential. On the PSR side of things, there's still a lot of confusion as to how that actually works. And I put a tweet out yesterday, and this is based off a little bit of research I did, and also listening to the likes of Kieran Maguire. So by paying £35 million to Newcastle, it means they can instantly book that full £35 million as pure profit on the PSR account that ended yesterday. So that takes care of their PSR requirement. In terms of Forest signing him, it goes into the next 5 years. It's a 5-year contract. So that's going to be 7 million over the next 5 years. The fact he was signed yesterday means that it features in the closing PSR period for literally half a day, which is worth about 10 grand or something like that. So it is prorated down literally to that hour. Again, I'm picking this up from the experts. This is not my knowledge, so I'm kind of regurgitating what I've learned. So Newcastle paid then Forest what was quoted and being touted at 15 million, but I think it's more closer to 5 million, whatever it may be. They paid money for Odysseus Vlachodimos, and so that's the same thing. Forest will profit whatever they can from that fee into their PSR calculations as of yesterday, and Newcastle can offset whatever fee they've paid over the course of the contract he's been offered, which is, I don't know what it is, maybe 2 or 3 years. And so the money can go into different areas, and it can be quite confusing. But ultimately, I think the most important thing is that Newcastle are sort of sorted, we're sorted. And I guess when you're bringing in a player like Anderson, who it's more based on potential, it can cause people to wonder. But I did put out another tweet yesterday. I think that I noticed a lot of people getting very excited about a lot of the players we've been linked with, the 18-year-olds in Brazil and the Eric da Silva Moreira, who signed, who's 17, and everyone's like, oh yeah, this is great, and we're signing brilliant players, young players. But the minute we sign a 21-year-old English lad, it doesn't seem to inspire people as much. And yet this guy has made quite a few appearances for Newcastle. He's played in the Premier League. So I kind of feel like I'm more excited about Anderson than I am about some of the other unknowns, Richard. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say just from I hate to say it in these terms, right? Because it makes them sound like, a USB device, but they're plug and play, right? And for him, just because some of the challenges that those kids are going to face coming from a foreign country, right? As we talked about, I think in the coffee club, there was some discussions around just transitions for people like Danilo. And so with Anderson, he fits right in, right? He's comfortable with the culture. He understands the landscape, but at the same time, I think he's got a little bit more maturity to him right away, you would imagine, being 21 years old, a few years older than those other players. Those other players are supremely talented and they're very exciting, as you stated. And it's really amazing to see the profile that we've tried to transition with. This whole getting the PSR thing out from under us seemingly opened up a completely new approach to recruiting. At this point, it's all about talented, young, positionally versatile. So yeah, I would agree with that 100%. It feels like the Arsenal model, the Chelsea model, those kinds of teams that are in that upper echelon of the Premier League are going after these really unknown but supremely talented players from abroad, and so it's nice to see us finding a way to fit in a locally grown player and giving him an opportunity to develop under Nuno. And with Vlachodimos going out too, that thins the ranks a little bit, gives us a little bit smaller team and gets him off the books. So it's good to see that.
Just
go ahead.
Just one other interesting thing I thought on that is that at the same time we've signed Anderson, is Brighton have signed. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Minte. So I'm guessing Brighton potentially had the choice between the two because they're sort of both deals that were done to help Newcastle with PSR. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, we always, as a club, are looking to emulate Brighton a little bit. They've gone down the route of the slightly younger player who's got a little bit more recent game time, but in a different league. We've gone for the perhaps more traditional Premier League ready player. So it'll be interesting to see over the course of the next couple of seasons how those two work out because we paid similar fees for a similar type of player. So I think that'll be quite an interesting one, whether one does better than the other.
Yeah, I think also the fact that Anderson is English comes into it to a certain extent as well because of squad quotas or the quotas within your squad that you need to have. So that might have played a part. And again, we don't know if there was a choice. It might have been that Forest wanted Anderson. It could well have been that. But what do you reckon, Dan? Is he going to start? Is he actually coming to play? Or is he going to have to make his way into the team? And does he improve us?
Well, I suppose my first caveat on that is that we've got a long way to go in the transfer window, so we don't know if a spot will open up between now and the start of the season. There might be something in those Elanga rumours that comes back round. But I think, other than that, I think he could force his way into play on the left wing. Obviously, that clash with Callum Hudson-Odoi, who's had a good finish to the season. If he's not going to play in the 10 role, I don't think he suits the right wing so much. I don't think he's that kind of pacey player that's cutting in. But I've not watched enough of him to know that. So it comes down to Nuno's vision of the team, which I'm not sure we've fully seen yet. I think he was adapting to what he had last season. He was sort of trying to find a way through it. Maybe he's got a plan that involves more of a versatile midfield three with Morgan, Anderson, and another in there that allows a little bit more fluidity and who's supporting the attack and things like that, and you maintain Elanga and Callum Hudson-Odoi on the wing. We don't know. It's hard to know. I don't think we've necessarily seen how Nuno wants this team to work. Whether or not Nuno's had an input in some of these players or not as well, not sure. But it'll be interesting to see whether he kicks off quickly into the season or whether fitness-wise as well, he just takes a little while to get going.
It's also about options. It doesn't always come down to who's going to start every game. It's about having options, horses for courses, finishers, as they're called now, people coming off their bench to affect the game. And as you said, Dan, when he came off the bench against Forest in the City Ground that time, he stood out to you. You've remembered him because he changed the game. And that's what we need. We need players that can come on and make a difference because ultimately, as much as we are in love with our players that wear the red shirt, because they're our players, we get very attached to them. And we know how good they can be. We still finish 17th. We were the skin of our teeth staying up. And so, we perhaps need to take the blinkers off a little bit and be a bit more objective with some of the players and how they're performing and say, look, if they're not doing well, we're very quick and easy to do it with England. Get them off the pitch. Same has to be for your own club. And if you've got players waiting in the wings that can come on and affect a game, then forget the name. It's all about the quality of the player coming on, doing a job for the team to affect change and to affect things positively going forwards. Forest Chief Football Officer Ross Wilson said, "We are all delighted to welcome Elliot to Nottingham Forest and pleased that he has chosen to continue to develop his talent with us in the Premier League. We are sure he will thrive in a Forest shirt, as other players in his age profile have done. As soon as the opportunity arose for him to potentially join, it was something we were all excited to make happen." And I also read as well, touching on position-wise, Forest touted him or mentioned him on the website in their presentation of him as a player as able to play as an 8 or a 10. So that's maybe how he's going to be used, in that middle of the park situation. We're going to have to see what happens, but it is certainly very exciting when we start making signings. And everyone was worried about the PSR and how that was going to affect us, and were we going to get lowballed for the likes of Murillo and the other players as well. But ultimately, it feels like we've gone into the next part of this transfer window in a much better shape than we possibly might have done. How do you think, Richard, it's going to shape up then? So we've crossed over that first milestone. The first deadline has passed for PSR. We've got our ducks in a row. We've bought in Anderson. How many more do you expect us to bring in? We've got 2 months left of the window. I'm asking you the how long is a piece of string question. I do understand that, because with Forest, it could be anything from 3 to 30. Let's hope it's not the higher figure as well. But I mean, next couple of months, we've got past the first PSR deadline, Rich. How optimistic are you as we now progress through July with incomings and outgoings for Forest?
Yeah, I might be drifting too far into the, intensely optimistic sort of grouping, but I would say this puts us in a much more advantageous position. We've got an opportunity now to really target some key areas. I think we still need a striker potentially, because we know with Taiwo's injury history, with Wood getting older and being in the last year of his contract, we've got to fill that void. That's a hard one to fill, and it sometimes can be expensive. We've also got a center back is a concern now, as we talked about with Niakhate. It affects the depth of the team. So we've got to get a left center back, and especially if that's the case, if we do end up offloading Murillo, I think we need some depth on the left back or right back area. I mean, Aina can obviously drift over to the right back position, play and do really well there in case Nico's injured. So those are the 3 key areas that, in my mind, 3 or 4 key areas. So I would say 3 or 4 probably is what we're looking at the most, because I know Nuno wants to keep that team small. We've certainly learned our lesson from the first year in the Premier League in terms of all the excessive amount of players that we signed throughout both windows in that first season. So that's what I would imagine where he's going to go. I think we've got enough depth in midfield right now at this point, but we just need to shore up those other areas. And we don't know what's going to happen with Callum Hudson-Odoi, Langos, Dan kind of alluded to, and you've talked about, Greg. Because look, there was rumors out there of 3 Premier League teams looking at Callum Hudson-Odoi, right? So if the number is insane, if we're looking at 30, 35 million, 40 million, something in that range, then now all of a sudden we've got to fill that area as well, right? So there's a lot that could potentially change as it relates to who's going to end up going out. And then that means we now need to, hey, maybe Anderson does shift over to the left wing, but now who's going to back him up, right? What are we going to do with Aguilera, who's played well with Costa Rica during Copa America, right? So what is he going to do? Is he going to be another loan scenario? So there's still some questions to be answered, but I think it's kind of dependent on what happens with those 2 starting wing players. Hopefully we keep them, because I think they're both going to be even better next season. But
yeah, I mean,
it's just...
on the Aguilera thing, I'd like to see him given a chance in the squad. He was signed 2 years ago. I mean, how long do you keep sending a player out on loan for before you think, okay, we need to develop him ourselves a little bit? And so I'd like to see him coming into the squad. And if he's played in the World Cup, he's now playing in a Copa America for his country. He is good on the ball. I noticed that he seems to be playing more in the midfield rather than I've always seen him as perhaps as more of a 10. But in terms of the lineup shape that Costa Rica put out for their last game, he was sitting a bit deeper, maybe more of an 8. But he's one that I would love to see given a chance, not just to be given a chance. I don't want to just give players a chance for a charity. I mean, he's obviously a good player. And I just want to see Forest do something with the players that they sign rather than sending people out on loan all the time. So I definitely like to see him given a chance. What do you kind of see happening, Dan? Do you see much happening in terms of outgoings in the next few weeks as well as incomings?
My gut feel at the minute is that there will be a significant outgoing, but it'll probably be right at the end of the window if we're trying to maximize value. So I think there will be. You touched on it earlier. We've kind of got an extra 50 million through for Niakhate and Mangala. We've got the 50 million odd for Johnson from last season. So we're kind of £100 million of revenue up from where we were the previous year in terms of PSR period. And we don't know whether we're just breaking even or whether we've got a little bit more to play with. Obviously,
I think that has made us break it. I don't think that's given us extra headroom. I think the Johnson deal and the Niakhate Mangala deal that were included in the PSR period that closed at midnight, that has brought us to effectively even Steven. So I don't think we've got any extra in the bank from what I've read.
Which is good, but it's also slightly worrying that we've needed that much to just kind of break even again, and it does allude to some of our wage bill issues and things like that, which again might have eased up a little bit. So I think the club will continue in the way that they always have. I think they'll try and maximize whatever they've got available, try and spend what they can, hopefully crunch the numbers and get it right so that we're not in quite such a tight position again. But I think that's why it might be tempting to cash in on one of the assets for a peak value now, rather than risk them getting injured or the contracts just running a little bit further down the line and teams not necessarily feeling like they need to offer as much to get the player on the way up. And I think maybe we'll go for that so that we can reinvest again in a few areas, because I still think, like you say, striker is an area where we could go out and spend any amount of money to really try and improve the starting 11 there. I think in defence, we definitely need to. In terms of centre of defence, we need another really solid starting option there. And for me, left back is another big area. So I think I expect it'll be another busy one in the same vein that it always is at Forest. We'll try and max out the limits and probably be tempted into a big sale, I think.
Forest seem to be targeting young players, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, etc., within that young bracket. Why do you think that is, Richard?
I think they see that the even though we keep coining the Brighton model, I think even with Palace too, they brought in some young players. Like Eze was a young player that they brought in, right? And Elise as well. And so they realize that we're in a point, and I don't know what that says about our academy, because I hope it doesn't say something negative about our academy. But I would say that they've targeted that because they understand, look, we've got some very talented players that are moving into the mid-20s, late 20s, and then early 30s arena in terms of age. And so we've got to get these young guys in, get them into the culture, get them fitting into what Nuno's vision potentially is for this team, assuming he sticks around for the long haul. But and then keep developing those guys so that we have something in the future that we can consider to be assets, right? Because who knows if Elliot Anderson becomes something we turn around and sell for 60 million or 70 million down the line, depending on how well he plays, or Morera or one of those guys. So because they've had some opportunity to play for their international squads on their under 21 or under 19, under 17 squads. So there's definitely some opportunity there to potentially see them as assets down the road. So I think that's kind of why they're doing it. They understand they got to build for the future.
I think that's all true. I'm also thinking maybe it could be something to do with wages to a certain effect. So sure. Think about Vlachodimos leaving, gets him off the wage bill, apparently one of the highest earners. We had Origi on loan last season, who apparently was on stupid money per week as well. So bringing in these so-called experienced players also brings in a high salary as well. So I'm not saying that's the sole reason, but ultimately there's got to be, it seems like there is a strategy in place, which is great. If there's a strategy and there's a plan, then sticking to that and hoping to see it come to fruition is something that we all want to see. In terms of an outgoing, with us now meeting our PSR obligations and we're pretty sure we're not going to breach again, we're not being held to ransom or have anything to our heads when it comes to selling one of our gems. So we're talking about Murillo, we're talking about Morgan Gibbs-White, and to a lesser extent, Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga. These are players that are going to attract other clubs. And so, Dan, you touched on the fact that there may be them coming back for Elanga. It could well be that we've said, we'll let you have Elanga, but we will let you have Elanga in July or August, something like that. And we're going to expect you to pay big money for him. we'll have to see how that comes out. But what kind of message is it sending now? What message should Forest, Dan, be giving to the players at the club now? I'm talking about Murillo and I'm talking about MGW and so on, because I don't know how much they might be agitating for a move, or if they are, but I know Murillo has spoken in the Brazilian press about, loves being at Forest, but if there was a move, I hope the club would respect my decision. And I kind of hate hearing reports like that, because it's almost like you've got a contract, mate. We just picked you up from Brazil, where it's your dream to get out of there and make the kind of money that we're giving you. And I kind of just wish that sometimes these players would just be a little bit more cautious with things that they're saying. And he's young, and I understand that, and he's got ambition and so on. But now we're in a position where we can say no to any club that comes up. What kind of message should the club be putting into these players' minds that might be thinking, well, if you need to sell, or if I want to go, then I'm going to look to go. So what do you think they should be saying to them at the moment?
Yeah, it is tough. I think with Murillo, I think we've got a little bit more opportunity to say, look, it's one season in, it wasn't a massively successful season for the team as a whole, even though he individually did well. So there's still a bit to prove, I think, before you get maximum value for him as a defender. I think if he has another season at this club, playing regularly, and we finish closer to that top 10, or even top 10 if we get carried away, then I think that's better for his career than jumping ship now to a team where he's not going to play as regularly. So hopefully that's the message to convince him. I think with Gibbs White, having seen, not to depress people, but to bring up the England game last night and see some of the options they have there, he's just crying out for a player like Gibbs White who will do something different and take the ball in a dangerous area. And you've got the likes of Conor Gallagher, who doesn't seem to really ever. I'd never really notice him in any game that he plays these days. Back at Palace, he seemed to score a few screamers, but since he's been at Chelsea, he's getting into that side because he plays at Chelsea. So that's the thing with Morgan Gibbs White, is he's clearly ambitious. He clearly loves Forest, but he was loved at Sheffield United's previous club and things like that. He's just a player that's going to give his all wherever he is, and at some point he's going to get an offer that's tempting for him. And I don't really know how you convince him to stay, other than perform, become a top 10 team, so that he's in that picture.
The other caveat is that Anderson's just been bought and can play in the 10. I mean, it could well be that all of a sudden Morgan Gibbs White is going out the door for 70 million because Forest think, well, we bought someone in who we want to play in that role. He's young and we think he's good enough. So thanks, Morgan, because you've done 2 years with us as well. So it could be that it's Morgan. I think a lot of people, before everything was, a bit more clearer about PSR, were choosing to sell Murillo over Gibbs White, because Murillo apparently is a bit easier to replace than that spark. As you talk about, Dan, you're absolutely spot on. I know Richard his heart is melting when we're talking about Gibbs White at the moment being sold, because I can sense it. And I think we're all the same. We all love Morgan. I mean, there's energy, passion. If he played in that England team, I mean, it'd just be fantastic. How much of that, Rich, do you think is in Morgan's mind about, well, I want to play for England and I want to be the one that's getting selected? Is that going to be a massive driving factor for him, do you think?
I think he probably doesn't want it to be at the top of his mind. He probably doesn't want to have that push and pull, right? Because I think emotionally he enjoys what he's doing for our club. I mean, he loves playing for Nottingham Forest. I don't think that's even a question, right? When you watch him on the pitch, when you see when he scores goals, when good things happen, that energy just goes up another level, and he already has a ton of it to begin with. But the
cynic in me,
the cynic
says that he'd do that for any club that he plays
that's
for.
That's probably true.
Who clap and applaud him and sing his name.
Yeah,
he'll do the same for.
And I agree with you.
That's his job.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's just how he's hardwired.
He doesn't feel about Forest the way that we feel about Forest. Let's make that crystal clear.
Yeah,
None of them.
You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right there. But I would also say that I could completely see that he needs that opportunity. I think he's earned that opportunity with his play on the field.
Because
So
Brennan was off straight away. Brennan grew up at Forest, and he was
Sure.
our Anderson a year ago. We had to sell him. Okay, we cocked it up with timing and got a points deduction, but he was our Anderson, and he was out the door as quick as he could go because he wants to step up another level.
Sure.
And when Morgan's looking at the likes of Brennan doing that and other players, potentially doing that to go to a top 6 club, then I think Morgan will be out the door as quick as he can two shakes of a lamb's tail, personally.
Absolutely.
As much as I hate to say it.
No, I completely agree with you, especially if I would 100% be behind that statement. And I would also say that he probably knows it's a benefit to the club, right? So if there's any heart in the club, that, even just a little bit, as you said, the cynic will say that he'll do that anywhere, which I don't disagree with. But I think he definitely enjoys his time here, and he has enjoyed his time here. But I'm totally, yes, the heart tells me I would hate to see that happen because I think he's a building block for the future and he's a centerpiece of what we do. And he does so much for us. You can't replace on that pitch. Maybe Anderson's that guy at some point in the near future. But as of right now, he's the most indispensable player on that team. And if you let him out the door, great, because it benefits him and it benefits us. Totally get it. And he'll be beloved for the rest of his career by our fan base, right? For what he's given to the club when he's been here.
I think fans get worried that it's never going to be as good as the player you've got, Dan. So one of my most favourite players playing for Forest in the last 10 to 15 years, or probably not one of my favourites, my absolute favourite is Mikel Antonio. Now, Mikel Antonio spent one season at Forest and we were in the Championship in a team that flattered to deceive, as they often did. But Mikel Antonio, for me, was unbelievable in a Forest shirt. I've not seen anything like it, and he would go into my all-time best 11 now because I think he was just exceptional. With at one point, he needed 6 or 7 players to try and get the ball off him. He was unbelievable. And when he left for West Ham, I was crushed, thinking we're never ever going to get a decent player like Mikel Antonio again. But you do. Other players will come along, and the next one along on the line, Dan, will fall in love with, and you just never quite know what's going to happen until that player's gone. I mean, we were worried about losing Brennan Johnson, but Callum and Anthony stepped up. So should we really be fearful, Dan, about losing Morgan Gibbs-White?
I probably am fearful. I think the most specific example I can give is the Collymore example. When we sold Collymore for good money, we got good money for him. We could have done something with that to maintain ourselves as a Premier League team, and we didn't. We signed some average okay players, but we never replaced him to score us the goals to actually keep us in the Premier League. And, we just slowly drifted out of it. So, yeah, from that experience, I kind of think I'd do anything to keep hold of him. Like you say, Antonio and players like that, similar. It took us a while to kind of catch back up from that, albeit for other reasons around transfer embargoes and stuff. So, yeah, I've got to say, I would definitely rather keep hold of you would rip the core out of the team with Morgan Gibbs-White leaving. However, it may just be an inevitability that then puts the focus onto the recruitment team to say, right, you've got to go and find us that player that's not just going to be technically good, because we've had some technically good players, but he's got to still be the heart of the team as well. He's got to have that energy level that is what Morgan really brings, that I haven't seen in too many other players, not just at Forest, but, in that position, in that role, at most clubs, having that combination of a player that can really contribute to the whole midfield as well as being that technically good on the transition and in tight areas is not easy to come by. So if we do sell him, we should have a lot of money to find a replacement. Just hope that the recruitment team have got someone in mind to be that.
It feels like, I think, as you touched on a moment ago, that if there is going to be one of the big ones going, one of the gems for big money, then you'd expect that to happen late, like it did for Brennan, right? So if it's happening late, then the club need to bring in the players beforehand, before the window closes. I'm stating the obvious things here, I realise that. So I guess, are we going to be guided by how much activity? So if we brought in, a good amount of players between now and the last week in August, how much is that going to drive our opinion as to, is there going to be someone out the door? Are we going to be surprised? I guess it's a bit of a rhetorical question, doesn't need an answer, but I'm asking myself, are we going to be surprised and Forest just slam the door shut and say to all interested parties, no, when it comes to them making inquiries for Murillo and the others? And that would be amazing, because then we know where we're at with with the quality players that we all love, with those additions coming in, Anderson and the rest that will come too, then it's going to feel quite exciting. I mean, I'm already excited, but I'm more pleased, I think, guys, that the PSR situation has been really handled much better by Forest, and then being part of this, behind closed doors group of club owners saying, listen, let's get together and let's help each other out. Like I said, I think is a good thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the next couple of months, as all Forest fans are. I think we should be really happy with what the club have been doing so far in terms of few incomings and Vlachodimos going as well. Any player that pulls on the shirt for Forest deserves respect. It didn't go well for him for whatever reason. When he came into the club, I was really quite excited. I'd seen a bit of him at Benfica, and I thought we got a good goalkeeper here. But for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. And so moving him on was something we had to do. I wish him well, but ultimately it gets him off the wage bill, and that for Forest has got to be a big thing. Okay, some wider club news. So I want to touch on some other things happening in the club before we talk more about the men's first team. On the women's side of things, the head of women's football, Amy Wildgust, and first team manager Carly Davis have been very busy. Molly Green is a defender who has signed a 1-year extension. She's a calm and composed player who stood out in defence last season. The women's team are delighted to retain her services, as well as Emily Batty, who is a goalkeeper. She's also extended her stay at Forest on a new 1-year deal. She's made over 80 appearances for the Reds, and she's a previous Golden Glove winner. It's great to have her still with us at the club. Freya Thomas has signed a new 2-year deal. She's a midfielder who rejoined the club last season. She was player of the season as well, and her new 2-year deal has gone down very well amongst the women's ranks. And we should also mention a new signing. Amy Sims joins from Derby County. Ooh. Midfielder, scored 40 goals over the past 2 seasons. She won the Golden Boot in the 22-23 season. So welcome to Nottingham Forest, Amy. Also, in the academy, there's been a little bit of activity. The head of the academy, Chris McGuane, has been also very active. And Justin Hanks has signed a new deal. He's a 19-year-old defender. He's staying with the club for 1 more year at the moment. He's a youth international with Wales. And he's been at Forest since he was aged 10 or 11. So he's come all the way up from being a young child. He's made 18 Premier League 2 appearances last season, and definitely is one to watch for the future. And also, there's a new deal for Jack Thompson, another defender. He's also 19 years old. He's signed on at the City Ground until the summer of 2026. He's a hard-working player. He made 14 Premier League 2 appearances last term. And so another one that we will look out for in the future. We want to try and see some of these young players breaking through into the first team picture, because ultimately that pathway for clubs is we've already touched on. It's where the money's at, right, Dan? If you can get a gem from your academy, then that's where you can, bring in some serious cash going forwards. I mean, I don't know an awful lot about the players at the academy. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, he's a good player and he's a good player. I'd love to know more about them. But how important is it, do you think, that we start to see, Dan, an academy player breaking into the Forest first team?
Yeah, like you say, since we've been in the Premier League, I feel like I know less about the academy players. We had a good period for a few years in the Championship with obviously Brennan Johnson was the last of a sort of set of 3 or 4 players that came through, and it seemed like there was always a little bit of news about, this player's just getting close to the first team and they're going to be involved and they're a really bright prospect. But at the minute, there seems to be a little bit less of that. The Dale Taylor seems to be one that's closest. But probably still himself, and perhaps Aguilera. I know he's not part of the academy, but both those players for me ideally you get them a championship loan to prove at that level that they can do it regularly, and then no question you can promote them to the first team. So it's massively important. I mean, it is the business model now for anyone outside the top six. When you look at the value of revenue that those clubs bring in, there's a 50% jump from even the likes of West Ham to the top six, and teams that are in Europe doing well fairly regularly. So for everyone else, if you can do what Newcastle have just done, bring in 35 million quid for a player to help you out and keep you moving forward, then it's got to be worth investing a few more £1 million now, early on, to try and improve whatever we can in terms of the structure, the facilities, and drawing the players in for the long term.
I couldn't agree more. There's nothing you said there that it's hard to disagree with anything on that. Richard, just thinking about the women's team, how good has it been, do you think, for the club as a whole to really integrate the women's team into Nottingham Forest over the last few seasons? Formerly known as Forest Ladies, they transitioned into becoming Forest Women and really kind of came properly under the ownership, if you like, of the club. How successful do you think that's been so far, Rich?
Yeah, I think it's definitely shown that they're investing, right? Beyond just the first team, men's team. They're trying to do more to expand their horizons in terms of their footprint within football as a whole. And I think they've played really well, and they've shown that they've got a lot ahead of them. So it's nice to know that the club sees that, because I think that's a big deal for Niakhate, right? Is to invest back into the community as a whole, show that he really wants to grow this as a brand beyond just what our first team does, men's first team. So I dollars and cents wise, I mean, who knows? But as it relates to just, I think the optics of what he's trying to build holistically, I think that it's there. The evidence is there, so I appreciate it from that standpoint. And they're brilliant, and they're talented, and they're progressing as a team, and so that's exciting to see them, keep some of those key players in place. And then Freya Thomas, obviously, like you mentioned, being one at the top of that list in terms of the most talented. So I'm glad that we see the value in that beyond just the dollars and cents. We see it as a opportunity to show everyone around us that we don't just think about men's first teams. We think about exactly what Forest means to all individuals and all those who love football in general, women's, men's, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have a really good position within the women's game. That's taken off, hasn't it, dramatically in this country? It's taken off. I know that in the States where you are, Richard, it's always been for a long time the women's game was much bigger than the men's game. It was huge, and the Lionesses have been a big part of that here. And to see Forest news coming out on the women's side of things, it's interesting. It takes a bit of getting used to. I'm not going to lie. At first, it's I just want to hear about the men's team, but actually now I want to know about the women's team, and that's a genuine thing as well. And it's changing maybe attitudes and opinions of maybe some old goats like me that were a bit more, I want to know about the men's football and not so much about the women's football. But actually, it's valid, it's good. And I'm hoping that they'll get a few more games at the City Ground this season. I think they play elsewhere, don't they? Their games mainly. And so it would be really good to get them up at the City Ground more. I know they've got a huge support. I know some of our listeners and watchers, Ollie's a big fan of the women's team in particularly. I think we're going to have Ollie on at some point down the line to chat about that and Forest as a whole. So look, talking Reds, we are very much focused on the men's first team, but we also want to talk about the women's team and the academy as well. And we very much value what Forest are doing for the community, the netball team as well that's just been introduced. So it's a way of bringing the community together in many, many different ways, and I think that should really be applauded from the club. Okay, we know about one or two players that have come into the club recently. Back to the men's first team now. So Marko Stamanic deal was agreed. So this is, old news now, but just to kind of bring us up to date, Marko Stamanic coming into the club, gone straight out for a season-long loan to Olympiacos. Just briefly, Dan, what did you make of that one?
I have no opinion on that one. I think that's one to just skip over and see what happens in a year's time. I have no idea what the logic is behind that. He might be an exciting player, but yeah, I think we'll have enough to worry about with players that are going to be here in the Premier League, I think.
Well, it's that Olympiacos link again that is never going to go away. And I think that, ultimately he's gone there for a reason. Red Star Belgrade, New Zealand international. He's got a Serbian heritage. So, yeah, we'll just have to keep an eye on him and see what happens. But he's going to be at Olympiacos for a season. We have completed the signing of Eric da Silva Moreira. Now, this is the sort of 18-year-old German international, or under 18, under 17 German international, I should say. He's won the World Cup at that level with Germany. And I mean, he was presented, Richard, by the club as a bona fide brand new signing. He wasn't presented to the club or by the club to the fans as, oh, look who we've signed. He's going to go and join our academy, or he's going to be loaned out. He was presented like, this guy's coming to be part of the first team fixture. That's how I read it. What did you think?
I completely agree with that, actually. I think he, if nothing else, depending on what happens with Elanga, I honestly think he's backing up Elanga at that right wing position. I mean, it doesn't seem to say anything else at this point, right? Based off of what you just mentioned. I think his talent speaks for itself when you watch the highlights of him. He's got pace, he's got athleticism, he's got ball skills, he's got a number of things that he's going to offer the team right now. And he's young, so he is, I think, ready to sort of fit that mold of the team guy that's going to hit the first team, but eventually will become a starter for our club.
I mean, Dan, he's not really featured for St. Pauli, who we've signed him from. I think he made like 1 or 2 appearances for their first team in the Bundesliga 2. And again, we know nothing about these players. I mean, we're all jumping straight onto Wikipedia. We're all jumping onto Google to find out about these players. Let's not kid ourselves. None of us are experts on these young players that are coming in from the continent. So we're trying to catch up with a name like Eric da Silva Moreira. It's a Portuguese name, so it looks like he's got Portuguese or Brazilian heritage of some kind. Whether that comes into any difference, makes any difference, I'm sure it won't. But yeah, right wing back has been his position. He's kind of fell back into more recently, Dan. So what do you reckon? Are we going to see him on the edges of the first team?
I think so. I mean, it makes sense in terms of backup players that they are the younger players that aren't going to be too frustrated if they aren't playing regularly. Will need a gradual introduction. So I think it makes sense to go for players that are younger. What I always wonder with this signing is, because it's a George Mendes agent signing, is it a player that's just sort of been put forward, or is it a player where we've done the scouting originally and said, oh, we like the look of that guy, he's going to suit this league? Or is it more of just a kind of, well, he's available, let's take him because it's fairly low cost? So that will be the thing that will be interesting to know behind the scenes, to see whether he's been specifically targeted by us. But yeah, I think looking at some of the stats, he scored goals when he's played for the younger the youth teams and the reserve teams and things like that. So clearly could be a good option for all sides of the right wing.
Yeah, I think we'll just have to wait and see. I'm a bit worried if all of our backup players are the 17, 18-year-olds. So I don't think it's going to be that way. But he definitely looks like he's been presented as a first-team option. His age mirrors some of those academy players that I just mentioned signing new contracts. So some of our younger players in the academy, the 18, 19-year-olds, will be they're only good enough at the moment for Prem 2. And yet we're bringing in an 18-year-old who we're going to put straight as the first team. I guess my trust is that the scouting has been done. It feels like Forest are back onto a more professional and even keel in terms of recruitment now that George Sirianis is back in the room. I think he was elbowed out of the way, as we know, quite quickly, but he was the one that identified Taiwo Awoniyi as well as 1 or 2 others. And so I think his position at the club has been reinforced. He's been given, a wider role for the Marinakis family and their clubs. So I'm hoping that his presence and his knowledge is being used alongside the fact that obviously he's a George Mendes client. Nuno Espirito Santo is a George Mendes client as well. So, that synergy hopefully is something that we're going to benefit from, rather than just grabbing a Pickham out of the continent just to put into the club. So we'll see. I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic about this young player, based on absolutely nothing at all other than love for the club, hope that Forest know what they're doing, and belief that they're finally getting the recruitment strategy right. So let's also think about, we've got a bit of time still left to talk about some rumours of some other incoming players. So, Hassan Diao, another 18-year-old. So, an explosive and powerful winger from Real Betis. He's been muted as another target. Who wants to talk about this one? Who's done their research on this one? Dan, what have you got to say about this target that we're looking at?
I did go and I don't think I've ever watched YouTube highlights before doing some prep for this. I've never given him any weight, but I did watch his, and most of it seemed to be defensive howlers as opposed to brilliant attacking play. But he looks incredibly quick, tall as well for a quick kind of winger. And when he's got the ball at his feet, he seems to glide. So he's definitely got some raw talent. Whether or not, I don't think he would be close to being a finished article that's going to be, creating assists and scoring goals. But I think he's definitely got some raw talents that would suit the Premier League and playing on the transition and things like that. That is the style Nuno tends to like. He did start playing for Real Betis first team, I think, but he scored twice in his first 2 goals and then drifted out the team. He didn't really play in their last sort of 15 games of the season. So I think that suggests he's a raw talent that could be a surprise, but he's going to take a few years to probably get up to Premier League speed, I would have thought.
Okay, so, well, keep an eye on whether he's coming into the club. I'll throw this next one at you, Richard, because you talked to me about this chap a week, 10 days ago. Jakub Biol, he's the Slovenian centre-back. He plays for Udinese. He's a very, very solid defender. He's been part of that Slovenian back line that kept England at bay in the World Cup game. What do we know about him, Rich?
Yeah, Udinese player, right? Starting left center back, and so he kind of fits the what we're looking for as it relates to that physical profile in that back line. Because, like it or leave it, I love Murillo. He's brilliant. He's got immense talent, but he's not great in the air. Right, and he doesn't solve our set piece debacle. And when you put a guy who's 6'5" with the kind of physical profile this guy has in terms of how he plays, because he's highly aggressive, but he also has a 94th percentile for aerial duel win rate for all players in all European leagues. So to me, and he's 25 years old, so he's still relatively young. He certainly made his presence known against Denmark. So I would say we've got a guy that's, and I keep using this phrasing, and I've used it very often, unfortunately, with Jacob Greaves, but he's an ascending player, right? And I think it's one of those guys that you bring in, and maybe you bring him in initially because you're not 100% sure what's going to happen with Murillo, but with the likelihood that if Murillo leaves, which could happen in January, could happen before January, could happen next season in the offseason, you have a guy, I think, who can slot right in. And now you've got 2 6'5" players in your center back position. And to me, that puts you in a much more advantageous position to avoid a lot of the same issues we had last season.
David Carmo was another player that was mentioned or muted in a similar mould, who spent the last half of the season at Olympiacos on loan from Porto. Clearly, centre back is a position we need to strengthen in, Dan. And so also I'm thinking about style of play. I think when you've got a player like Murillo in the side, who is so technically gifted on the ball, so comfortable on the ball, does that then mean that you effectively or subconsciously end up playing in a certain different style at the back, where you're trying to be more progressive with the ball and potentially the holes can get left? Whereas if you are old-fashioned defender, I mean, look, I'm thinking of how Slovenia defend against England, where they're just putting a wall of players up. Do we need more of a wall of players up in our defence at the moment than that enigma maverick type Murillo, who's wonderful to watch and can almost score from our own half? Do we perhaps at this stage for Forest need more of a Biol coming in than we do a Murillo?
We need the option for me. I think the difficulty with Murillo is he's so good and entertaining that it's hard to leave him out the side. But I sort of feel like there's games where he suits it and he would be your first choice defender. Similar player to Niakhate in terms of the type of defender that he can do well against. You know, Niakhate had really good games against Ollie Watkins, for example, where it's all on the floor. It's a battle to run the channels and things like that. Can do really well at that. But then you come across a Solanke who's in the box, clever player, just trying to nick a yard of space, win the odd aerial battle and things like that. And that's where he struggles. So for me, it'd be good to have an option that you prepared to play over Murillo in certain games, unless you switch to, say, a back three to incorporate both. So it's definitely having that option. I think what Murillo gives you is not necessarily a change of style. I think he's just so good in terms of seeing and executing the longer passes that it's that transition where Murillo actually stands out, as opposed to possession play. We've seen some of the balls where he just hits it first time and he can just find a pass that no one else is seeing on the pitch. So I don't think it's necessary
for the Chris Wood goal. Newcastle, the way we carved it forward, that's the perfect example of what you're saying. I think.
So I think actually he benefits us more. The more we play on transition and more we play direct, he actually benefits us more than the possession game, because I think possession game for centre backs is just 5-yard passes to a midfielder and back and a centre back and sideways and things like that. I don't think that actually makes the most of his ability, and I think that's a consideration for the type of team he goes to in the future as well. You're not necessarily going to see the best of him if he's at a top club, because he'll have less to do in a lot of ways.
I think Murillo is tailor-made for a top 6 club because of the way that they'll choose to play and the kind of the type of possession that those teams tend to have. I mean, I'm not trying to sell him. I think he's done enough of that for himself, but I think he'd fit into a Pep Guardiola team, an Arsenal team easily. Arsenal have got very good centre backs, as have Man City. I think, just to put my own opinion quickly on the outgoing, I do think that Murillo will be the one that goes in this window by the end of the window, or whatever point that is. I'm guessing. I'd like to think that we're not going to lose Elanga or Hudson-Odoi. I don't think Gibbs White will go this window. That's just a gut feeling. Again, it's literally a guess. It's just based on a hunch and based on putting all the factors and all the cards that we're talking about into a deck and like just putting it together. And that's where I'm kind of getting my opinion from, just based on everything we know. But it is guesswork. None of us saw Elliot Anderson coming to Nottingham Forest on Friday night. I'm taking my son swimming to his lesson on Saturday morning, and I pick my phone up, and all of a sudden, the internet has gone bonkers because we're looking to bring Elliot Anderson in. At that point, what was a swap with Elanga. So, it all comes out very, very quickly. And when there's a deadline, it freshens the minds a little bit and everything gets done quite quickly. So we might have a little bit of a lull. We're still waiting for confirmation of Carlos Miguel, the goalkeeper, coming in. And just before we finish then, guys, let's talk about more outgoings. And I'm talking about those fringe players, because I was expecting to see a bit of a fire sale in the last few days of those players that have got no future at the club. So I'm talking about Joe Worrell, Lewis O'Brien, Emmanuel Dennis, Hwang, even Alex Myton and Josh Bowler. I was expecting us to take reduced money to get them off the wage bill to get some money coming in for the PSR. Now that we haven't got that to worry about, we think we're 99% certain that the PSR sorted. Let's say it is. Then we can also, as much as we want to move these fringe players on, Richard, we can also be a little bit more solid with it. We're saying, well, look, as much as we want them to come off our wage bill, Mr. Buying Club, this is the fee you need to pay for them, as opposed to having our pants pulled down. So do you expect to see more of those fringe players moving on before we start bringing players in, Rich?
Absolutely. And it's as you've just stated, it's for a completely different purpose, right? It's to reduce the ranks and reduce the volume of players we have on the squad. It has nothing to do with, at this point, what if we're Worrell, for example, that's pure profit, as we know, so that's a good thing. But yes, I completely agree with you. I think it puts us in a position now where we're not worrying so much about, is it a sum of the parts scenario just to get over the PSR line? And we've already solved that issue. So now we can progress towards what do we need to do to try to reduce the volume of the players on the team. And whatever we get for them is going to be of value at this point. And so it's not really adding much to potentially our pool of revenue to try to drive incoming signings that are going to replace some of those, but in reality, it's just about thinning the ranks.
Who do you think is going to be going out the door, Dan? All of the above. All of the above.
Yeah, I think the club will be trying. I think the challenge is always the wages, especially with a player like Joe Worrell who signed a contract not long ago on Premier League wages. It's not about necessarily the transfer fee we're prepared to accept or not accept. It's about a club that thinks, I'm going to not only match but probably have to improve on those wages, and it's not necessarily worth their while as they see it. So I think the younger players will go sooner because they'll be on the lower wages, the likes of Mighton, maybe Josh Bowler, players like that. I think Joe Worrell, yeah, I don't know how that one works out. Really, you need a Premier League club that wants to take him. Ideally, say Ipswich or someone wants to take him. That would work out. If he's going to drop to the Championship, it becomes a challenge on wages. So I think some of those will, again, might end up as loans because that's obviously one way around it to at least contribute towards the finances without another club having to fully commit. But yeah, I mean, Alex Mighton's a strange one that he's kind of really dropped off as one of those younger players with potential. So hopefully he gets a good move somewhere that can kick on.
I always liked Alex Mighton, but I just never thought he was strong enough. He's so small. And I know there are other players that are of a smaller stature that really do go on in the game. I mean, I remember when Raheem Sterling burst onto the scene at 17 at Liverpool. You know, he was a small player, but he was strong. He's always been strong. And I just don't think Alex is strong enough. And I hope that he gets a move to a club and we can get $1 million for Alex Mighton somewhere, which I think is probably over egging it a bit. That would be fantastic. I want to see these players getting moved on and sold. I think it came back to bite us that we speculated a bit that we might not survive that first season, so we ended up buying players for the Championship if we went down, such as Josh Bowler. And I think that we've got to stop doing that now. We're going into our third season in the Premier League. We are an established side, and hopefully that's a bit more of an attraction for players to come to us. I think I even saw a quote from Elliot Anderson. You know, Forest are an established Premier League side now, and that makes a difference. No one wants to go to a team that you think, well, I'm only going to be there for a year in the Premier League. They're going to get relegated. We've proven that we can stay in this league, and we're going to be getting better and better. So, yeah, hoping to see a few players moving out as soon as possible, and less loans, more perms needed. Right, we're at the end. We hope that you will consider liking this this pod and subscribing. We are trying to push our subscribers up, so I'm sounding like I'm begging a bit, but you know, we're on a mission to try and get up to 1,000 subscribers. If you would be so kind as to push that button and help us along, then that would be absolutely fantastic. We're so grateful for you, anyone watching along at the moment and then watching later on the playback. We're so grateful for you taking the time to check in with us. You can listen, of course, on Apple and Spotify as well. And we'd love any review of a 5-star nature that you would be willing to leave us. These kind of things always go down a treat. You know, we're just trying to find our own little corner in the podcast world to have a chat about Forest and the club that we love. As I've said repeatedly, you know, we've all got an opinion. And if anyone watching wants to jump into the comments at any time and give us their opinion, we'd love to read it. And anyone who wants to come onto the podcast, we are a fans podcast, and there's a seat there for a fan every time we can to come on and air your views as well. So we hope that you would take that opportunity to come and join us. All I have to say is to Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to have you join us for the first time on Talking Reds. Anything you want to say before you sign off?
No, just thanks for having me. Obviously, anyone listening, give it a like and subscribe. I really enjoyed the Cheese Trader episode that you had last time. Just interesting to know how someone gets into being a cheese trader as much as Forest as well. So no, definitely recommend subscribing to anyone.
Thank you. I mean, our view is that, you know, everyone's got a Forest story, and it's interesting how they become fans of Forest, but also it's a little bit about the person in question. So finding out about Stu Freestone and his cheesemonger business is fantastic. And so, yeah, go check out the Cheese Trader Cheese Trader episode. That was a good one. Richard Spray over in Oklahoma, getting ready for work now in the moment, aren't you, sir? Have a good day over there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you, Dan. Great to have you on.
No, thanks. Good to meet you.
So that just about sums things up for now. Keep an eye out on Twitter and our social media channels, and we'll be back soon with your latest Talking Reds Forest Roundup. We'll see you next time.